Welcome to the Fierce as Fuck podcast. I'm your host, Amanda King, and I'm here to teach anybody who wants to fucking listen how to have the audacity to say fuck it to societal standards and live their most authentic life. This podcast is dedicated to bringing sexual conversations from behind closed doors onto the main fucking stage. Because sex, masturbation, squirting, guess what? It's all fucking normal. And by bringing these conversations to the forefront, we help people feel less alone in this world. We help them feel safe. We help them gain their power back, step into their confidence, and have the ability to express themselves authentically as fuck in this world. Because it takes fucking audacity to be your truest self. And we have boatloads of audacity up in this bitch. So let me ask you this. Are you ready for some epic shit? I wanted to do a podcast episode dedicated to the unrealistic expectations that modern media puts on sex. I was having a conversation with one of my clients about something that she was going through and experiencing sexually with one of her partners. And she was saying that like a partner she had been with in the past was like very into his own body, meaning like sex with him tended to last a bit longer. And that she was experiencing with the new partner that he was in his head a lot. And so when he got in his head, he would lose an erection during sex, or sex wouldn't last as long. And I think it opened up a really great conversation because I said to her, well, did you know that on average, statistically speaking, an average session of sex lasts between 20 to 30 minutes, in general around 20 minutes. And this includes foreplay, people. This includes foreplay. So 20 minutes from when you start kissing until you come, including foreplay. And she was like really surprised by this statistic. And I said to her, I took it a step further and said, yeah, in fact, penetration typically in sex only lasts between 5 and 7 minutes. And she just kind of looked at me like, what? And I was like, yeah, on average, like taking the like median of every single sex session on this planet, on average, it's 5 to 7 minutes. And she said, holy shit, I never thought of it like that. And it goes to open up such a larger discussion on how the media makes sex seem how it's supposed to be. And like, I'm not even talking about porn, because porn is a whole other unrealistic avenue that gets portrayed about sex, right? Because like porn is very much, most porn is done from the male gaze, which tends to focus on the man getting off and the female being some type of person who's just like an instrument or a tool in order for them to get off on. And then the woman is making all of these fucking ridiculously loud noises, which like some of us are loud, some of us aren't. And it already puts an unrealistic expectation for men of what sex is going to be with their partner, because women are a lot more complex than just this like slam pig that porn makes them out to be. So I'm not even discussing that. I'm talking about modern media, modern movies and TV and how they portray sex. And one of the biggest examples that I can think of that I most recently saw was 365 Days, the sequel. I think it's called like Later or something like that. And if you haven't seen it already, it's basically a 2-hour porn. There is minimal fucking plot to this fucking movie. The first one, trash. But I already saw the first one and I had to see the second one because I saw all the comments on TikTok about how it's basic porn. So I watch it and literally they make it seem like the sex sessions between the two people are like fucking 45 minutes to an hour long. And I sat there and I laughed at it. I didn't even find it sexy. I think that the way they portrayed the sex, right, it's a little bit more of like softcore porn, where you obviously see there's penetration, but like she's basically like fully clothed in a lot of it. And so it is seen, definitely, I see where they were going with like trying to do it with the female gaze of her pleasure, but I think it just makes it so unrealistic that it makes women believe that every sex session should last 45 minutes with a man, which is just like not realistic, ladies. Let's even break this down. And I hate to make, how do I want to say this? Like, how do I want to say this? I hate to give men credit sometimes, but like, we have to recognize the amount of pressure that is put on a man in a sexual situation. And this is not disregarding the amount of pressure that is put on women either, because there is so much pressure. And I'm going to talk about that too. But when a man is initiating sex or coming into a sex session, media has made it seem that it is his job to make the session last really long. And that's because we're watching like movies and TV where sex is supposed to be like 20 minutes long. And so a man comes in with this pressure of like, I've got to fucking last, right? Not only do I need to make sure that she has and receives pleasure, which should be his number one fucking thing. Like no matter what your partnership is, man on man, woman on woman, non-binary with non-binary, pleasure is supposed to be the whole reason you were fucking. And it should be not only your pleasure, it should be the pleasure of the person that you are having sex with. And so when men in general come into a session of sex, they feel this innate pressure to have to perform, in a way, a long sex session. So what a lot of men will do during sex is they will kind of give themselves intrusive thoughts. And women definitely have them too. They're a little bit different. But basically the intrusive thought, the idea of one, is exactly the same. I'm getting overstimulated, right? I need to stop this stimulation. If I am a man and I'm having sex with a woman and I'm about to come, or even like I'm a woman having sex with a woman and I'm about to come and I don't want to come right now, I'm going to have this intrusive thought that is going to slow me down and slow the pleasure down and slow the stimulation down. And so in sex, a lot of times men have to constantly do this over and over and over again, which means they're basically edging themselves. They're getting themselves to a certain point, pulling back, certain point, pulling back. And this can sometimes cause, during sex, men to do this intrusive thought process and then lose their erection, right? Or if a woman is doing it through her intrusive thought, like she's intrusively thinking, she loses her orgasm. And they are doing this to slow stimulation, but we also have to recognize that like we've got to take the pressure off men to last a certain amount of time during sex. First and foremost, a sex session shouldn't be timed. Right? Let's just throw that out there. Sex is a consensual, spiritual, fucking emotional, just connection. It's intimacy at its finest level. And we shouldn't be putting benchmarks on how long it takes us to reach that maximum amount of pleasure. I even remember as a woman, when I first started having sex and I was kind of unsure of what orgasms were. Like I knew what they were and I knew I was feeling them, but I wasn't experiencing them at all levels. I would like have an orgasm super fast and I'd act like it didn't happen. Like I wouldn't get as stimulated. I wouldn't allow myself to ride through it. And I would try to force it to stop because I thought, oh my God, I'm coming too quickly. Like I'm having this orgasm too quickly. And so I know what it feels like from a woman's perspective to feel that. Imagine is the same, like a man's perspective coming in, and modern society and media has portrayed him as the person who's supposed to make it ever fucking lasting. And so if you're a gentleman listening to this, my like fellowship, I guess my audience tends to be like more female or female identifying, and rather than men, but just in case we pick up some men along the way, like men need to recognize that it's not about the longevity or the duration of sex. It's about the pleasure of sex. I have had sex sessions that from penetration from start to finish have lasted like 7 minutes. Maybe you would call them quickies. And they have been the best sex of my life. They got in. It was intense. It was so good. It was intense. It was passionate. It was pleasure at its fullest. It was like I was feral. They were feral. Like we were feral as a couple and it just needed to get done. And that sex is so fucking satisfying, right? Because my pleasure is taken as a priority and then their pleasure is then taken as a priority. And it's this beautiful just moment of climax together. And that can be and happen within 5 to 7 minutes. I have also, on the other hand, have had sex for a half hour, 45 minutes, where it was not great. I'll remember, every time I bring up a sex story, I laugh. I remember a session, I slept with a guy from high school. I had a one-night stand with a guy from high school after I had left high school. So like I was in college, I had come home, I had never had a one-night stand before. And I was like, I want to have a one-night stand with someone I know. And that I somewhat trust because we went to high school together. We were like kind of in the same friend circles. Like we had dated when we were in like elementary school. Like I knew this guy. So I was like, let me have sex with him. Let me have this one night stand. And we had this one night stand and it was fucking terrible, guys. It lasted. Don't get me wrong. He was like doing the, like penetration wise, it was probably like 30 minutes. And I was bored the whole time. I remember being in his bedroom, just staring at the ceiling. I wasn't turned on by it. It wasn't sexy. It just didn't do it for me. And although it lasted long, it wasn't pleasure filled. And I would rather any day of the week, and like, correct me if you're wrong, ladies and gentlemen and people, like, please message me on Instagram and be like, nah, dude, I like to be fucked for 60 minutes solid. Like, please educate me on your preferences. But I personally would rather have a sex session that was 5 to 7 minutes of intense, absolute mind-blowing pleasure than a sex session of 30 minutes of like, okay, this is all right. And so gentlemen or men who, or people who identify as men, if you're listening to this, recognize it's not about the duration. It's about how much pleasure you can give a woman. Because I can tell you right now, if you give a woman so much innate pleasure and then you penetrate her and the penetration is only 4 minutes, if she's already had an orgasm 2 to 3 times, that's just icing on the cake, right? That is just an added bonus. She is already in a good space before penetration. If you automatically jump into penetration and your penetration like lasts 2 minutes, that's something completely different, right? If she's not feeling pleasure, that's just not great. And that's not going to feel good. And so it's not going to matter if you last 20 minutes or 5 minutes. If you are not giving her pleasure and your partner is not receiving pleasure, that's what they're going to focus on. So in a way, it's like, take the pressure off of yourself to perform. And this goes for women and people who identify as women. And just like in general, people who have vaginas as well. Like we get intrusive thoughts a little differently, right? Like intrusive thoughts typically with men happen when they're trying to slow down stimulation. And this can work with females as well if they're trying to slow down stimulation with their partner and with themselves. But it also with women tends to work on like intrusive thoughts are these thoughts that these nagging thoughts that happen in the back of your head. So you could be having sex and all of a sudden you look down at your thigh and you're like, oh my God, my thigh looks so big. Intrusive thought, you lose it. Right? Even if you are on like the precipice of having an orgasm, an intrusive thought for a woman can like totally shut her down. This happened to me a while back when I was having sex with my husband and we were having sex and like he was giving it his all. He came with his aim game and like I just had this intrusive thought about something that just wouldn't go away. And it was like this nagging thing in the back of my head that I was trying to like get rid of. Also trying to figure out, okay, how do I use this to like get off? But it just wasn't working. And so with women, we tend to get intrusive thoughts and be bombarded by intrusive thoughts all of the time. For a woman to get into her body with sex and enjoy the experience is a bit harder for them than with men. Men are able to easilier shut their brain off during sex. That's why like a lot of men don't find things like super disgusting during sex, is like noises, bodily fluids. They don't give a fuck because there's a part of their brain that just shuts off. Women, we become so much more hyper aware of that. So we become hyper aware of the entire situation. So if we're having sex and there's a weird noise or like bodily fluid or whatever it is, we can easily get like grossed out in the minute, and we can easily, boom, intrusive thought and shut ourselves down, which really fucking sucks as a woman. And also women, in the same kind of coin that we talk about men performing, don't feel like you have to perform. Porn makes women out to be, like I said, these tools of just like orgasmically screaming all of the time, like yes, yes, fuck yes type of screaming, which like rightfully so. If you own that, you own that. Like I'm loud in life, I'm loud in bed, and I'm just gonna fucking own that. But there are times where women are gonna orgasm and it's going to be more quiet. And it's going to be more sensual, and it's going to be more tapping into their body rather than performing for your significant other. You don't need to perform, right? This isn't an act. This isn't a play. This is a consensual just experience of intimacy between two people. It shouldn't be like you're trying to perform and be some fucking porn star. That is unrealistic. So if you are someone who is a little bit quieter, it's okay to be a little bit quieter. I would say if you're a little quieter, reassure your partner that they're doing things right? Because I think that that's what, as well as like, I've heard a bunch of men say things like, oh, well, I don't like when a woman's quiet. Well, first off, like, it ain't about what you want there, home skillet. But number two, if you are quiet, communicate that to your person. Say to your the person you're sleeping with, like, hey, I'm not a loud screamer, or I'm not comfortable enough with you in this moment. I don't feel safe enough with you to allow myself to express myself vocally like that. And one day I hope we will get to the point that I am, but just so you know, like I'm into this feels good. And I will try to communicate more with you when it happens. I think that communication is best. I mean, obviously it's best when we are having sex, but being able to have these conversations ahead of time so that like each party knows what to expect when they're going in makes sex that much more relaxing and like non-pressured centered than sitting here and not having these conversations ahead of time, where then we kind of feel like we're either playing this role or like we're nervous during sex. Like there's always like a good amount of nervousness, but if you're always nervous during sex, it's time you start kind of speaking out about what's making you nervous and how to make yourself feel more comfortable, because you should feel more comfortable with sex. Just as the same thing, I was watching something on TikTok last night about like tips for deep throating. And the one thing that she said more than anything is this is supposed to be a pleasurable experience for a woman as well. If you were the person, a woman or a man, if you were deep throating, the experience isn't technically the person getting deep throated, it's the giver, right? You should be at a relaxed, comfortable state at all time. You should never feel pressured. And if your partner is pulling your hair or pushing their fucking cock in your mouth, you have the right to stop them and say, this doesn't feel good, right? You as the giver, it's your responsibility to communicate when the receiver is crossing boundaries. In deep throat and literally in sex, if someone is crossing a boundary that does not make you feel good, you have got to be able to speak up for it. And in the moment, I understand it can be really hard, especially if this is someone new that you're experiencing this with. If this partner is like, this is your first a couple times, right? It's all trying to get used to your bodies and trying to get comfortable with it. But if you are not communicating, then you are going to be stressing out. You're not going to enjoy the experience, because sex is supposed to be an enjoyable experience. It's supposed to be fucking relaxing and pleasurable. And if you were tense and tight and just stressed out the entire time, like, you've got to talk to your partner about this. You've got to, like, in a way, set the scene for yourself, right? Like the woman who was on TikTok gave advice, and she said, if you're going to deep throat, right, and you want to feel comfortable, set the ambiance. Like, put some flowers out, put some nice music out, like light some candles, put yourself in the most relaxed state you can be in so that you can enjoy this experience, so it's no longer a chore, right? We don't want sex to become a chore. And how many times in marriages does sex become a chore, and sex becomes stressful, and sex becomes heavy, and then all of a sudden every time we're thinking about sex, we're no longer turned on. We're like, ooh, no, this is too much. This has become a thing I have to do instead of a thing I want to do. And I really believe that if we openly communicate our sexual needs a little bit easier, a little bit more, this could help ease some of that tension. And especially when we start looking at sex as a chore for someone else's pleasure, rather than focusing on our own, because your fucking pleasure matters. When I go into sex, I go in with this, obviously, I want my partner's pleasure to matter. I really do. But like, my pleasure needs to be a priority as well. And as a woman, my pleasure tends to take a little longer. And so I like when the pleasure starts with me. My whole theory on anything sex is the more pleasure I receive, the more pleasure I give. And so being able to openly speak to your partner about that and saying, listen, if you give me pleasure, I'm going to give you that equal pleasure, because it should be equal. It shouldn't be one person receiving more pleasure than the other. And we need to have these open and kind of sometimes difficult conversations in order to move our relationships forward and reconnect intimately with our partners if we're no longer intimately connecting them. And just know that media is a crock of fucking shit. I mean, even books. You look at book talk can be fucking, not book talk, I'm sorry. You look at adult fantasy books or adult smut books, like sometimes these are really unrealistic sex scenes. And so you can definitely fantasize them and you can definitely experience them and like explore with them, but don't hold yourself up to that energetic standard, right? Your sex sessions get to be whatever the fuck you want them to be. So let them be that way. And remember, this isn't movies. This isn't fake shit. This is real life. And the more you experience pleasure in sex and the less pressure you put on yourself, the better you're going to be. Love you all so much. Have a good one. Thank you so much for listening to the Fierce as Fuck podcast. And some parting words for you today. Remember this: no matter how hard society pushes you down, no matter how many times you fall, as long as you get the fuck back up, they can never stop you. You are unfuckable with. You will win. Don't allow this world to dictate how you show up in it. Don't allow society to make you bend the knee. Instead, make them bend theirs. And don't forget, if you like what you heard, go on to iTunes and Spotify and leave your girl a review. Until next time, my beautiful people.